champion becomes a legend. McKay has won it. Perkins goes in third.
What a legend. What a champion.
Welcome to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
It is that time of the week again where we celebrate the life of a great Australian sportsperson on This Is Your Sporting Life. Good to have you with us. And today we celebrate the life of a man who played 244 games for the Navy Blues, a four-time All-Australian, Carlton captain, State of Origin star, and he's also had a few other roles in football. His name is Andrew McKay, and he joins me in the studio. Andy, good to see you.
Thanks, Pete. Great to be here.
How are you travelling?
Yeah, going well. I'm enjoying my time out of footy at the moment, which is really nice.
So what are you doing now?
Well, I had a bit of a holiday after I left Carlton at the end of the season last year, and then I've been doing a little bit of consulting work, some of that for the AFL, some for a couple other people. But funnily enough, I actually start a new job next week.
And that is?
That's in the agribusiness. So going back to my veterinary skills, going back to my farming background, which I'm really looking forward to. A little agribusiness called Zamira.
Okay, now why did you leave Carlton in the first place? Because you're so heavily identified with that football club in so many ways.
Yeah, I certainly, it's been a big part of my life, as you're alluding to, playing there for 11 years and then had a brief stint away and then went back there obviously for 7.5 years. But I'd been there for the bulk of the 23 years I've been in Melbourne. There's been a lot of change there. There's certainly change there again last year, and I thought the time was right for me to get some experience somewhere else. And I think probably the time was right for them to have a new face in that chair as well.
So did you leave on good terms?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So it was very amicable. I gave them plenty of notice. I knew around June that I was going. I told them in July and, gave them plenty of time to find a replacement, which is great for them.
Is it harder, Andy, to be at a football club when you are not consistently winning? I mean, the day-to-day operations of a football club, I guess the nuts and bolts are much the same. But the football club is all judged on the W's in the column, isn't it?
It is indeed. Yeah, it's a win-loss industry, as we keep getting told, and it is. It becomes more of a grind. You don't get the reward for effort because even though a team may not be winning all the time, they're not trying any less than the team that is winning all the time. And in actual fact, they're probably trying more ways to go about it to try and get a few more wins on the board. So it does become a grind. You need that rejuvenation of wins to keep you stimulated. So that does play a part, and I'm sure it plays a part on the players' minds as well.
As an experienced football person, what do you do to keep the spirits buoyed of young men who are going through that and who are constantly reminded of the fact that the team is not winning? You've been around footy for a long time. How do you keep that morale up amongst a footy club that's not winning games?
Yeah, highlight the little wins. So if a passage of play has been fantastic or some individuals have been doing really well, you highlight those and celebrate those, but not forgetting the fact that you need to win as well. That you don't want to get into the habit of having honourable losses because it ends up being a mindset in a sense. So you're very cognizant of that and unaccepting of honourable losses. You need to win, and so you got to keep people up, and it's about the coaches and the staff around the players that have to be up. If they're dragging their knuckles along the ground moping around the football club, then that's going to reflect on the playing group. Those staff need to be up and about to get the players up and about.
Honourable losses is one of those phrases that goes with potential. It can be something that is promising, but it can also be a dirty word at times.
Yeah, that's right. Too many of them is very dirty.
Yeah.
And as you say, we're in a win-loss industry, and there's expectation from members and stakeholders that you win games, and particularly coming from Carlton, where it's recognised as a big club, and there's been enormous expectation in the past there. That they are very thirsty for wins.
I don't want you to tell tales out of school because you've left the football club now, but You know what it's like. The talk starts, and the talk has started over the past couple of weeks about Brendan Bolton, and it seems like it's a bit of a stone at the top of the hill, and by the time it gathers all the moss all the way down, it becomes this huge boulder. What's it like within a football club when something like that is happening outside of the club? Do you just shut yourself off to it? Yeah,
it's noise. It's certainly outside noise, and you do your best to ignore outside noise, but the jungle drums do get louder and louder. I've been there. While I was there, obviously Brett Ratton was coach initially. He left. Then Mick was in there, and he left. So I've had 3 or 4 coaches, 4 including Johnny Barker, who was interim for a while. So the drums do start beating, and it's not just the coach, it's other staff as well. And they get louder and louder, but you've got to try and ignore that and got to try and shut that out. The people in the place at the time at any football club, if that white noise is going on outside, they have to concentrate on what they have to do. They can't control that. They've just got to do the best possible thing that they can by the football club, and that is work to the utmost of their ability to get wins on the board and develop their players.
You might not be at the club anymore, but you still bleed navy blue. Do you think that they are heading in the right direction? There appear to be some signs, but are the signs as strong as you would like them to be at the moment? Yeah,
I think they are. I know they are on the right path. They're heading in the right direction, as you say. They've got some really good young players. They need some more players for some depth. They need to, develop the players they've got there. We've got a number of really good players between year 1 and year 3, year 4. I'm a real believer that you don't actually get a really good player until you've probably played about 50 to 70 to 80 games of football. Then they start to be very good players and they can actually influence games. Our players aren't quite there yet, even the ones that have been there for 3 or 4 years, but they're nearly there. You're seeing signs from a Jacob Weddering, for example, who's got back to some good form this year. We need Sammy Petreski-Seaton to start stepping up, even though he's only been there a couple of years now, going to his 3rd year. It's time for him to develop and start influencing games because he's got the potential to do that. And there's various others that are going to do the same. We look at Charlie Curnow last year, for example, and he had a really good year last year. But you know what? He's a very, very young man, a very, very young footballer. And we just place enormous expectation on these guys' shoulders. And I'm not making excuses for them. Sam Walsh is new to the club this year, and he's had a really, really great start to his playing career. But the trouble with that is the expectation. So all of a sudden, people are expecting him to win games, and he's an 18-year-old boy that's played 4 games. So you need to develop them, get some good game time into them, get some more players in the door, and they'll be okay.
I walked past Paddy Cripps in the Virgin Lounge the other night as the plane was heading back from the Gold Coast after that loss that has been much discussed. And I'm not short, but I felt like a midget when I walked past him. In your time in footy, where does he rank amongst the great young talents that you've seen come through the game?
Oh, he's a beauty. He's exceptional. I was lucky enough to play with some reasonable midfielders as well.
Yeah.
Greg Williams, Craig Bradley and the like.
But different builds, different styles.
And it's a different game now too.
Yeah.
Patrick would have been super back then with his hands and his ability to win the ball. And that's one of the things that hasn't changed. You need to be able to win the ball still. You need to be able to run a lot better than we used to be able to run. But you need to be able to win the ball still. And Patrick has an enormous ability to be able to do that, and probably the best in the competition in tight. And for a 6'5" or whatever he is, very, very large man, to be able to do that is extraordinary. He's working on his running capacity. He's getting better and better at that because teams do spread away from stoppages, and he needs to be able to combat that. He's a natural leader, which is what Carlton needs, and he's getting better and better at doing that. So I'm looking forward to him just improving that on-field leadership over the next number of years while he's at the club.
One thing I've always wondered, Andy, and you can probably answer this, it seems as though when coaches all of a sudden find out that they're on the monitor, that they stop what they're saying or they alter what they're saying. Is there a procedure in the box that someone tells the coach that he's actually on camera and just you might want to be careful?
I think they can see. They've got a number of monitors in the box anyway. But as you allude to, Bolts has the trick of putting his hand over his mouth, and I noticed, I think it was John Longmire over the weekend or the weekend before was doing the same. So I think a lot of the coaches, they keep a straight face and let their mouth move, and then put the hand in front of the mouth so no one can work out whether they're angry or happy or saying whatever.
I think we can work out whether they're angry or not.
I was trying to play that down.
Time to take a break. We've spoken a lot about Carlton. We'll talk about your links with Carlton and where the journey began for you when we come back on the other side of the break. Andy McKay is my special guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funeral, celebrating lives, and we'll have more with Andy after the break.
Welcome back to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
What a pleasure to have Andrew McKay as my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. The town of Lucindale in South Australia, quite a famous town, not only because you were there, but I think a fella called Sandy Roberts was at Lucindale for a while, wasn't he?
He was indeed, and very close to me. Sandy's father managed one of our properties for a long, long time. So a little bit of family history here, Pete. We're from, originally we're from 100 miles northwest of Port Augusta, up near a place called Kimber, and that was saltbush country, real cattle grazing country. It rains every couple of years. and Mum's family had a farm down in the southeast of South Australia at Lucindale, and it was up for sale. And when we were very young, actually the place next door was up for sale, and Mum's parents died, and so Mum, Dad and my brother and I went down to have a look. I think I was 3 or 4 at the time, and it rains down at Lucindale a bit, and Dad said, "We're not moving down here, it's too wet." And within probably a 6-month, 12-month period, they'd bought next door and moved down. So, and lo and behold, Sandy's Mum and Dad and Sandy lived on the property that we bought. So we had a couple of Christmases with Sandy when literally I was 5, 6, 7 years old at that stage. And I still remember playing cricket on the front lawn of the house with Sandy bowling and I was batting, and he wouldn't remember, I'm sure. But so I've always had that connection, and then I didn't see him for 30 years probably, until I came to, since I've been I came to Melbourne when I was 22, but I didn't run into Sandy for another 5 or 6 years after that. So it was interesting.
What was the population of Lucindale?
Well, I think it was 200 at the time, but I'm sure it's shrunk since. And we're, most of the population, to be honest, is in the farming land around the town. But like any other country town, it's the heartbeat is the football netball club, and very proud history of country football at Lucindale, which was fantastic. And I had the privilege of playing with them for a couple of years, which I loved. And they wear, funnily enough, the Carlton jumper, but with LFC rather than CFC.
Right.
So, ironic.
Being on the property at Lucindale, was that where your affinity with animals began? Yeah,
definitely. We ran, what did we run? We ran 8,000 head of sheep. 14,000 head of sheep and about 2,000 head of cattle. So a lot of stock. And so during the weekends, or once I went to boarding school back at home on holidays, we obviously worked the sheep and the cattle and things. And I did have an affinity, and I still do have an affinity with the animals. And it definitely started on the farm.
Being a South Australian boy, did you have an SANFL team and a VFL team? Yeah,
well, we got 2 channels at Lucindale, Channel 8 and the ABC. And Channel 8 was...
Was that Mount Gambier?
Yeah, it was a local SES 8 station. And that gave us the big replay on Sunday with the VFL. So Dad followed Geelong, so I naturally went in his footsteps. Funnily enough, my older brother didn't. He actually barracked for Carlton. And so I always, follow the Nankervises and the Brunses of the world, and love watching the big replay on Sundays. And we had the World of Sport on Sunday morning. But funnily enough, we didn't watch a whole lot of footy. We were Nord supporters as well in the SANFL, again, Dad was a Norwood supporter, so we followed Norwood. And Norwood were quite successful at that time too, through that 80s period. And that, Michael Aish, was the star then, and we all loved watching Aishie. And so I probably watched more SNFL games than I did VFL games, and to be honest, I'd see 3 games a year, I reckon, of SNFL games. Right. And so that's how many VFL games I watched. I probably watched 1 or 2. I watched the highlights, basically.
SANFL-wise, you nearly captured their big award, the McGarry Medal, and the bloke who beat you was a reasonable player.
Yeah, he was pretty good.
What was his name?
Yeah, a guy by the name of Nathan Buckley. He could play a bit.
Yeah.
After I left school, I didn't really know what to do with my life or with myself. I wanted to go back on the farm, and one of my best mates who went to another school, he said, why don't we go and have a kick at under-19s at Glenelg, because we were zoned to Glenelg. He was from Narracourt, neighbouring town. And I said, yeah, right, let's do that. We'll go and have a kick, have some fun. So got halfway through pre-season, got our Year 12 marks back, and he failed. And so he went back to school. So he left me at under-19s. And so we had a year of under-19s, and we had a good year, and we actually got to the grand final. We wouldn't believe it. People were 10 goals up at half-time. We lost by 6 goals.
Really?
I'm not quite sure how you do that, but yeah, we're playing Norwood. And anyway, so after that, I went back home for a couple of years, and then Glenelg were asking me back over those 2 years, and I thought in the end, you know what, let's go back, and otherwise I'll continue to ask myself the question whether I'll be able to make it at SNFL level. And so I thought, bugger, I'll go back. Went back to Adelaide, had a pre-season with Glenelg, started in the 2s, got in the seniors, I think I played something like 15, 16 games that year. Second year came around, had a pretty good pre-season, but then didn't get in the team for the first couple of games, played in the 2s. Someone got injured. I got in the team round 3 and then started to play okay. And then momentum built and confidence grew and started to play a bit better and bit better. And then all of a sudden, I got invited to the McGarry Medal, and I thought, okay, I'll go along. A few free beers and free feed. And lo and behold, I came second. Now, I didn't just come second. I came second by a long way. There's a fair bit of distance between Bucks and myself, but I came second. And then I hadn't really spoken to any AFL clubs at that stage, but as soon as that McGarry Medal count was over, and then they started ringing, and I probably spoke to 15 of the clubs at the time, so most of them.
Was that on your radar? If you're playing SANFL and you're alternating between the 2s and the seniors, you're probably not thinking the big time. Not at all, Pete. I really didn't have an ambition to play AFL at all. As I said before, the only reason I went to Glenelg was just to make sure that I answered that question whether I could play SNFL footy or not. Did you have a preference where you wanted to go with 15 clubs to choose from?
Yeah, I did. I was older. I was 22 years old, and I'd like to think a little bit more worldly as a 22-year-old boy can be, but probably slightly more worldly than some of the 18-year-olds that get drafted. And we had a draft system back then as well. And there were some clubs that were financially struggling. I thought I'd do them a favour, Pete, and write a few letters to those clubs. I wrote letters to 5 clubs saying, just out of courtesy, if you draft me, I won't be coming, so please don't draft me.
Was that tinkering on the outside of the rules at that stage?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know whether the rules were actually written at that stage. They might have been. They were written, but I don't know how flimsy they were. Let's put it that way. So, and remembering that, it's interesting. They're AFL rules. I had nothing to do with the AFL, and so I got a letter from, I think it was Cameron Schwab or someone at the time. It was the day of the draft. And they said, under AFL player rules, you're not allowed to be prejudicial to the natural course of the draft system. Therefore, you have to withdraw your letters from those 5 clubs. And I said to my manager, who was a friend of mine at the time, I said, I won't say exactly what I said, but I said, you know what? I've got nothing to do with the AFL. I'm a country boy from Lucindale that's having a kick at Glenelg every now and then. I've got nothing to do with them. Let's leave it at that. What I didn't want, Pete, and due respect to all those clubs, because they've gone on in leaps and bounds and won premierships and made me look really quite silly, but at the time they weren't financially viable. Well, I thought that anyway from afar. And so what I didn't want to happen is me uproot my life, come over to Melbourne, and within 12 months the club fold. And that was how naive I was. The club fold and me have to go back to South Australia. Even though I probably thought I'd be going back after a year, given I wouldn't be able to match it with the big boys anyway. But I thought I want to go to a stable club.
Was it perhaps less daunting for you because you weren't so immersed in the culture that a lot of young people are before they go into a football dressing room?
I think so, yeah. I hardly knew any of the players, to be honest. I knew who they were. I knew...
Gee, you're like Gary Ablett in that regard, didn't you?
Yeah.
Senior.
The benefit I had, I suppose, is that there's a number of South Australians there, obviously, or certainly a couple, Stephen Kernahan, Craig Bradley in particular, and then a few had left already, Niles and Motts, and a couple others had left. So... Yeah, I obviously knew of Stephen. He was from Glenelg as well. David Kernahan was there at the time as well. I remember my first training session. I was staying in the hotel across the road. This is before I'd moved to Carlton, after I got drafted, before I moved over. We South Australians think that it rains a lot in Melbourne and give the Melbourneites a bit of stick about that. And I woke up Saturday morning at 5:30 or something. We had a 6:30 training out at, I think it was out near Bulleen somewhere. The club had arranged for David Kernahan to pick me up in his little red, I think it was a little red Corolla. Walked outside and it was torrential rain, absolutely torrential rain. I thought, yeah, welcome to Melbourne, here we go. So then Dews picked me up and took me to training, and that was the start of it. And it was a really, really nice journey for me with those South Australians there. It made it a little bit more comfortable, but embarrassingly, I didn't know anyone else. If I'd seen their faces, there's a story, Rats reminds me sometimes. One of the first training sessions, Brett Ratton had been at the club for 2 years and he played 60 games, I think, at the time. And I thought he was a new player. I thought he got drafted when I did. And I went up and shook his hand and said, I'm Andrew McKay. What's your name? He said, Brett Ratton. He said, I said, have you just been drafted like me? And he said, no, you did. I've played about 50, 60 games.
I'm sure you remember that for a while, Rats. And that's a good attitude to have sometimes, because the pressure of being an AFL player can weigh pretty heavily on a young man's shoulders, and that weight of expectation can sometimes drag you down rather than lift you up. Yeah, it can. But then most footballers are very competitive beasts, and they motivated by different things, and sometimes we are motivated by our own fears, and we are motivated often negatively. And in saying that, by saying that, I mean if someone tells you that you can't do it, you want to prove them wrong to do it. And a couple of people at actually Glenelg said, I don't think you'll be able to make it in that league. And I thought, you know what, I might try and prove you wrong. So even though I didn't have expectation, I thought if I played 10 games, that was probably me making it in my eyes, even though it's not. But if I can play 10, then fantastic, and see what happens after that. Lo and behold, I actually ended up playing every game that first year, which was fantastic. Timing is everything in football, whether it be getting a spot in the team or winning grand finals. Timing is so important. And I arrived at a time where Carlton were on the rise, and I arrived at a time where they needed a half-back flanker with some pretty other handy backmen, Peter Dean, Ange Christou, Stephen Silvani, just to mention a couple, Michael Sexton. Together we had a pretty good unit, and I was very fortunate to land at Carlton at that time. Well, when you go through that list of personnel, it's not surprising that the team was challenging for a premiership and eventually won one not too long after you arrived, and we'll talk about that when we come back on the other side of the break. Andrew McKay is my guest on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Hope you're enjoying the chat with Andrew McKay on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Andy, we mentioned the fact that you'd come into a very good football team, 1995. We probably proved it a bit later than we would have liked, to be honest, Pete. My first year was 93, and we lost the grand final to Essendon. And Essendon were favourites at the time, but we actually thought we had a really good chance to win. And we obviously lost by 8 goals or so. 94, we blew it. We finished top of the table. We felt that we were clearly the best team, and we lost in straight sets
that game out at Waverley Park against Geelong with 3 of their big boys not playing, and they played out of their skin and beat us, which bumped us out of the finals race. So we're pretty hungry in 95. We're very hungry, and we thought, well, this is our time. We have to win this year, and everything worked out well for us. We lost 2 games, and we ended up winning. So, which was, funnily enough, people ask, oh, what did that feel like? What was it like? And I always describe it as relief, because there was that expectation. We were the best team. If we'd lost that year, we would have been the laughingstock almost. Now, not laughingstock's probably a bit harsh, but we were expected to win. And when you're expected to win, you should win. So even though you have the joy of winning and all that sort of thing, and it was fantastic after the game, people say that, what was it like after the game, the celebrations? And I said, you do that lap of honour, and the one thing they don't give you is a deck chair, because you want to put the deck chair out and just lap it all up, and have the crowd and get a real feel for it. But that initial feeling is relief.
That year, probably that feeling, I've spoken to a lot of the Essendon boys from 2000. They said the feeling was, we're just going to win it. We just know we're going to win it. There was only one period in 95 where you probably doubted yourself, because I think you lost back-to-back games in the middle of the season, and that came as a shock to everybody. I bet no more so than you. Yeah,
that's right. We lost up at Sydney. I think it was around round 7 or something.
Yeah. And
we're expected to win that. And as you say, when we ran down the race, it wasn't a matter of whether we win or lose. It was a matter of how much we win by. And that's all we thought about. We never thought about whether we were going to win or not. It was just a matter of how much we were going to win by. And then we lost to Sydney. I thought, oh, God, that wasn't meant to happen. And then we had the next game against St Kilda at Waverley. I think it was at Waverley. And we thought, oh, it'll be right. We'll beat St Kilda. And lo and behold, we lost to St Kilda as well. I thought, oh, we better put our fingers out. And then after that, we didn't lose a game. So it just needed a bit of a clip behind the ears, I think, to keep us alert and making sure that we're playing the best of our ability to make sure we kept on winning.
A reality check probably came at a good time.
Well, that's right. It came. We won 16 in a row, I think, once we'd won the grand final. So obviously, what does that mean? It probably was around round 7, round 8-ish. Yeah. So probably came at a good time.
Cooter's been a guest on this program. You had the pleasure of playing alongside him. He had some sort of year in 95.
He certainly did. 95 had a great year, and even a bit later he had a couple of ripping years later on. I remember standing, I think I was quite deep one day at Princess Park. I think it was in the back pocket, and I was playing on someone that I always used to play on, and they turned around to me and said, "Did you just see what he did?" And I said, "Yeah, I know, it's bizarre. He's been doing that all year. It's incredible."
Yeah.
So that sort of highlights when the opposition notice something like that live on field and have the time to turn around to their opposition and say, "Did you see what he just did?"
Yeah.
He's a pretty special player.
What about Diesel? How special was he?
He was exceptional. He'll say in his own words that he couldn't run. By the time he played, well, funnily enough, when he was playing really, really good footy, perhaps his best footy, he couldn't train very much because he had sore knees. But for what he could do with his hands and his feet were exceptional. They made up for his foot speed. And I think he's probably fortunate that he was at Carlton when he was, because we always give him a bit of stick that he used to run down the wing when the ball was coming into our back line, stop on the wing and then run over to the other side because he knew it was going to come out of the back line and go to the other side. And he'd be there all by himself. So, but he was super, to play midfield all his career and then have a little spell down the forward pocket and kick 5 on grand final day is not too bad.
Seems remarkable now to think that was basically, in some ways, the end of an era. Do you think you played your grand final in the preliminary final in 99?
Probably, and we had a different team then too. A lot of the more mature players, the older players had left by that stage. We should have won 94, no doubt about that. We should have won 94. We obviously won 95. I nicked off to Brisbane to study veterinary science in 96.
You were fly in, fly out at that stage, weren't you?
Exactly. And then 99 was, we turned up to the prelim final against Essendon, which that game I think most Carlton fans will say is the best game outside of grand final win that they've seen. We turned up to that game and the Essendon supporters were lined up outside trying to buy grand final tickets. So that was a nice motivation for us to try and beat them. And, that that tackle of Brownie's goes down in folklore, I suppose, and the game result goes down in a pretty significant moment for the Carlton Footy Club. So we although you say we may have played that game, our grand final in that prelim game, funnily enough, when we got to the grand final, that first quarter of the grand final, we actually controlled the ball. We had a lot of it in the first quarter and a half against North Melbourne, but we couldn't score. I think probably halfway through or three-quarters of the way through the second quarter, Corey McKernan took a mark, who ironically ended up at Carlton a couple of years later, took a mark for North Melbourne from about 60 and turned around and kicked the goal. Neither they or us had scored for a long time before that, and it probably deflated us a little bit. And I think that's where the mindset came in a little bit to think, oh, Christ, here we go. They're going to get on top of us again.
You touched on that period where you were, I think, studying veterinary science in Queensland.
Yeah, that's right.
And you were flying in, literally you were fly in, fly out to play. How difficult a thing is that to do?
Yeah, it's interesting. They certainly couldn't do it now. It was a different era back then, of course. I said to the guys, to John Elliott and Parko and Cole Kinnear, and I think Stephen Goff was CEO at the time, and I said to them before my exams in 95, I said, look, I want to do veterinary science, I want to be a vet. There's 4 vet schools around Australia, including Melbourne. If I get into any one of those other 3, I'm going to go. And so I gave them the heads up very early. And I think they just looked at each other and said, yeah, sure, no worries, thinking there's no way I was going to go.
Yeah.
Sure enough, I didn't get enough marks to get into Melbourne, but I got enough marks to get into Brisbane. And so I went and met with Goffey and Cole Kinnear and Parko again and said, look, I'm in. I want to go. And I said, look, I think the fairest thing is for me to give up footy completely for a year, go up there, concentrate on my studies, get good marks up there to be able to transfer back down to Melbourne, because I had to get good marks up in Brisbane to be able to transfer down. And they thought, oh, okay, let's give this some consideration. So we left it at that. Jack Elliott rang me the next day and said, Marco, what are you doing? Come into my office, let's have a chat. And he said, right, no use giving up footy. You might as well keep playing this year. Let's come to an arrangement. We'll rejig your contract. We'll fly you down a few times when you want to play, but you should keep playing going. I said, all right, let's do that. So we rejigged the contract and flew down, as you say. Ended up playing 15 games. Most of those games are in holidays. Remembering we had 2 holidays over the footy season. I said to the guys, all right, I'll do this, but when you ring to see whether I want to play and I say no, that's it. Don't try and convince me or talk me into it or whatever. I'll try and play as much as I can, but if I can't play, I'll just say no and leave it at that. They said, yep, no worries. So Cole would ring me every Tuesday night. Marco, what do you think? Do you want to play? And say yes or no. He said, right, no worries. I'll speak. If it was no, he said, no worries, I'll speak to you next week. If it was yes, he said, rightio, well, we need you we're playing at the G or Etihad or Perth or wherever. Jump on this plane at this time and we'll see you there. If I was going to play, I'd train with the uni team that Thursday night. So I'd have one training run for the week. I lived with a mate of mine up in Brisbane. I'd do a 5 or 6K run with him a couple of times a week to try and stay fit. It was unorthodox, Pete. It was very unorthodox, and certainly you couldn't do it nowadays. It's a lot more professional game now. But it was
just part of a fascinating journey for you in football, and that took a turn after you stopped playing and you went to the AFL. And we'll talk about that when we come back on the other side of the break. Our final segment coming up with Andrew McKay on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. Back to wrap things up with Andy after the break.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.
Our final segment with Andrew McKay on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives. 244 games. Andy, did you go out in your own terms? Had the body had enough? What was the story?
The body was good. I actually won the best and fairest in my last year, but my mind was done. I was a vet by that stage. I'd been working for a couple of years as a vet. It was a grind. We were on the bottom of the ladder and losing by a lot every week. And I remember my last game, and I think I knew deep down it was my last game. We played North Melbourne and got done by 130, 140 points. Well, 130 points, 120 points, something. And I was down on my haunches at the end of the game when the siren went, and a couple of the North guys came over, Steve-O and Arch, and said, well done, what are you going to do? And I remember Arch said, because Arch and I used to play on each other a lot, and so there was a fierce rivalry there, but I think some mutual respect there as well. I'll never forget Arch saying, Mackie, you got to keep going. I said, mate, I don't think I can. He said, you got to keep going. I said, I'm not sure that I can, mate. And I thought, I'll give it a couple of months, end of the season, went away for a while, tried to work out whether I still had that fire in the belly, and came back 6 weeks later, and pre-season was just about to start at that stage, and came back to the club and said, you know what, I don't think I can do it, and said I'm going to retire. So then I announced it. I think it was the first day of pre-season for the 2004 pre-season. When you're losing and you've got a young team and a developing team, and it's hard to find those W's, it does become a bit of a grind.
You didn't need to, shall we say, massage the draft with the AFL drafting you in, a reigning best and fairest winner, and you finished up at the AFL. You were on the match review panel at one stage. Yeah,
when I left Carlton, I can't remember, was that following year or the year after, Adrian Anderson rang me and said, we want to change the tribunal system. Can you have a look at it for us? Adrian done a fair bit of background work and was proposing one way, and he said, can you just have a look and see what you think? And so I had a bit of a look at it for him, and it was actually, I thought, it's a pretty good system. We'll keep a lot of players out of the tribunal. Won't waste the players' time, won't waste the club's time, won't waste a lot of the AFL's time. And then he said, do you want to get involved? And I said, yeah, all right, I'll get involved. So I ended up being on the match review panel, which was a bit of a thankless task, but I ended up being on there for 5 years with Swabby, and ended up running it for a couple of years. And then I went into a game analysis manager role where I looked at the aesthetics and the safety of the game, and got a lot of feedback from clubs and stakeholders around, okay, if we change this rule for this reason, what will the game look like, and how will you play the game, and all that type of thing. And then I'd take that back to the Laws of the Game Committee, and then determine that, and that would largely determine whether we went down a rule change or not.
Is there one recommendation from your point of view at the time that you were involved that is in the game today that you think you're pretty proud of, that it changed the way that the game looks?
Yeah, cap on interchange.
Yeah.
Adrian Anderson was a big one for that, and it took my initial thought was we probably don't need it. We might be able to find some other ways to go about it, but we're able to do it in a really controlled manner. It's one thing you can control on the field. There's a lot of other things on the field you actually can't control, but that's one thing you can control from afar. So it was an easy way to do it, I suppose. And the thought process around that was, if you restrict the number of interchanges, because it's all around congestion around the ball, and congestion was becoming a problem back then, as it has been over a number of years again, because players adapt. So congestion was becoming a problem. Interchanges were up to sometimes 150 per game. And so what that does, it allows the players to go and have a rest on the bench, come back on and run at some fantastic top-end speed. But the trouble with that is it makes them get to every contest, or a lot more contests, so more players at more contests, which creates more congestion. So Adrian's thought process was, well, if we leave them out there for longer, then they'll get tired and they won't be able to run to as many contests, so the game will open up a bit. So, and I think that's worked. And then it's a matter of, okay, well, how much do you restrict it? And initially we just made it 120 because that was about the average, and we didn't want to upset the game too much, but we just didn't want it getting worse. So we put it at that, and then the plan was to pull that back in over the coming years. And I'd left by that stage, but that's what they did.
And so we get to just about the end of the football journey, but I'm sure one of your proudest moments in footy. Now, Carlton loves nicknames. We all know about Sauce, son of Serge. Are you Foa? F-O-A, father of Abby?
No, I don't think so. It's really nice. I never ever thought it happened, of course. 5, 6, 7 years ago, AFLW wasn't even thought of. So it may well have been in Gil's eyes, but not in anyone else's. So for Abs to be drafted a father-son pick last year and then to play this year was super. And it was.
I'll correct you, father-daughter pick.
Sorry, God, how am I going? I've been correcting people for the last 5 years, Pete, but father-daughter pick.
First ever.
Yeah, first ever, which is really nice. But and it was a very quick rise for Abs. My wife started a team at Paran, our local club, about 5 years ago, just with Abby's school friends. And so it was really kick and giggle, just have a bit of fun. And they actually ended up being okay. Had a couple of good players, and the girls just loved it. They loved tackling and going in hard and getting the ball and getting muddy and all that sort of thing. And they became infatuated with it almost. That was one of their social outlets when they were at school studying, to go and have a kick at the footy, which was awesome. But it was all very, it wasn't serious at all. And then Abby got invited to go to Sandy 2 years ago, as a bottom age TAC, as it was back then, TAC Cup program, and played bottom age for Sandy. And then last year she played top age for Sandy, and she actually really enjoyed it. She didn't enjoy it so much the first year because it was so different for her. And she really enjoyed it last year. And then all of a sudden she got picked to play for Vic Metro. And she did well. And then she got picked in the All-Australian squad, and we thought, oh, hang on, something might be happening here. So, and I think that woke her up a little bit. Thought, well, maybe I may be able to get into this AFLW thing that Dad started at Carlton a couple of years prior. It happened really quite quickly, and then for her to get drafted father-daughter and then to be able to line up. And it was actually probably nicer for me not to be at the club, Pete, to be honest, when Abs was playing. Particularly the first game, I could sit back and just watch it as a parent and not have to worry about everything else that was going on match day or the boys or whatever. So it was really nice that I wasn't at the club when Abs was playing, and I look forward to seeing her play a lot more games yet.
It's been a brilliant football journey in all sorts of ways. It's been a pleasure to sit down for an hour and talk to you about it. Congratulations on what you've done in the game, and we wish you well for the future.
Yeah, thanks very much, Pete. Been a pleasure.
Andrew McKay joining us on This Is Your Sporting Life for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives, back with another great Australian in sport. Same time next week. Hope you can join us then.
You're listening to This Is Your Sporting Life with Peter Donegan for Tobin Brothers Funerals, celebrating lives.